Good day, everybody. My name is Glenn Stafford. I am with Stafford Atlas AI, and today I have the pleasure of being with Joe Lowinske, who is with, if I pronounce this correctly, Nuvocode. Is that the correct name?
That's correct. Yep, Nuvocode Technologies, based out of
Nuvocode
Minneapolis.
Technologies. And what I'd like for you to start off with, Joe, is give us your history as far as entering into the IT field, which led you up to being a founder of Nuvocode.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my beginning in the field probably started like many. My background was in software engineering. For I worked for about a decade in startups between New York City, excuse me, in San Francisco, and worked for a number of venture capital funded startups during that time, and kind of got a very broad exposure to the world of web development. Really did a lot of full stack kind of engineering, very kind of common career path through that time. However, um, in 2024, I had an opportunity to sort of strike out on my own, which was always kind of in the back of my mind as something that I was interested in doing. I'm certainly someone who loves variety and the opportunity to tackle new problems and learn and apply learnings. And so this was a great opportunity to do so. Where it really got interesting, I think, was in late 2025, and this was around the time that AI was moving from sort of a conversation where people are using, chat, LLM interfaces to to do whatever their daily task might be. And the conversation really started in earnest around how do we integrate AI into production applications and deploy it in ways that will deliver ROI and will really be transformative in the way that sort of the promise has been since we really started hearing it come on the scene in a big way.
Okay. Now, Nuvocode pivoted to AI development, as you stated, late 2025, early 2026. What was the aha moment or key insight that drove this specialization in AI workflow design rather than the generic AI adoption?
It was it was a project I was working on in Q3 2025, and it, the intent was to sort of integrate AI in a way that should work. And it went okay, I would say, in terms of it delivered what the hope was, but it was just so clear it could be so much better. And what it really needed was a more thoroughgoing application of what a true AI technology stack can look like, that has separated concerns and has perhaps multiple different models operating at different layers to address those concerns. And it really got me realizing that what was coming next needed this level of focus and this level of attention to thinking at a systems level of how to use AI, because the asks of it were growing. It wasn't simply we just want generative content. It's we want generative content on Rails. We want to have guardrails around what we are going to do. We want the data that it produces to be correct. We want to be able to verify the input that comes back, and we want to do this all in a way that is actually going to be faster than our staff just doing it themselves. And getting to that point really necessitated the understanding and sort of building capacity around implementing those types of systems.
Okay. Now, you mentioned we were having a brief discussion when we did our pre-podcast that AI's true value is unlocked by making implicit organizational knowledge explicit. So, can you elaborate on what that means in practice and why it's a challenge not widely understood, even in the tech forward hubs of today?
Yeah, absolutely. The question around AI right now for many companies is sort of lives under the broad umbrella of AI readiness. And I think at a high level, many organizational leaders kind of understand what that means. It just says we have some place that we want to go. We have a vision that we want to implement with AI. but something in our organization is not prepared to meet the that that sort of that point where intention becomes implementation. And underneath that AI readiness umbrella, there's, separated concerns. I kind of lump them into about three different distinct categories, between data hygiene, data unification, but then also the the process mapping of workflows, everything your staff is doing that you hope to automate. And that last piece is really a process of making all the implicit knowledge that lives inside your staff's minds about how things get done and how to reconcile questions and ambiguities. All that has to be teased out and made explicit to a level where it can be expressed in code, because ultimately, if something is going to be automated, it has to be understood perfectly at the a very minute level by a machine. All those ideas, or all those decisions that your staff had to make, all those ambiguities they had to resolve when one system said something about the state of the situation and system B said another thing, they're able to sort of read the broader intent and make a decision on that, those kinds of things. And that is the reason that's a blocker right now, is because I see the conversation on AI readiness really focusing on the data hygiene and data unification, which are very important and absolutely table stakes. However, where I'm seeing people get blocked up is around this process mapping piece and this implicit to explicit transfer. It's looming. Some people realize that. I say most don't, but it's without question in a crucial step in this, and because the AI governance layer of your system is directly defined by that, what comes out of that mapping process. So you without governance, you don't have something that you can trust, or let alone put into production.
Okay, so you mentioned governance layer. You described AI agents requiring a governance layer built from the organization's existing workflows. What are some common examples of implicit workflow knowledge that organizations struggle to document, and how does Nuvocode approach the rigorous process of mapping needed to distill this knowledge?
Yeah, so a great example would probably be, say in finance, you have a client, yeah, sort of client management tasks. Where if you're an accounting firm, perhaps you have staff sort of update, keeps the client updated and interacts with them on the state of their account. There's many things that go back and forth in those sorts of flows, from generating reports to maintaining, sort of like setting up meetings and maintaining meeting agenda, things of that nature. Now, with before automation, if you have 10 different staff handling this, you might have 10 different workflows. And there may, in the case of, say, giving a customer update, a very simple example, where it might happen over email, the customer may uh, send an email which, if it were just read dryly and not in the proper context, it might seem to imply that it wants a reply. However, because the human can understand the broader context and sort of the way that email interactions tend to go, they realize that this isn't a thing that we actually want to reply to. But in the case of an automated system that doesn't understand that, it an agent kicks off an automated reply. Perhaps it's written in a very obvious AI voice, and it becomes sort of broken feeling or embarrassing. It feels low touch. And the thing that would have solved that is that knowledge that has to be inside your staff members' brain about how they understand when and when not to reply, those things have to be really robustly understood. And a lot of times these rules aren't really even conscious to the people themselves. And so this is like, that makes it additionally challenging and puts a burden on those who are charged with this sort of process mapping to be able to really dig into areas of ambiguity and detect them in the first place. The way that we're approaching this now, and I should say that this is, as far as I can tell, process mapping is not new, but doing process mapping with the intent of distilling it into an AI governance layer is rather new. And so there's definitely a bit of learning on the fly in this case, but I have sort of some of my colleagues that I work with who are sort of they have a lot of background in this. We're kind of in the process of sort of like building out a sort of flow, and we're always sort of like kind of refine the questions we need to ask. So it's something like a process mapping, like a standard process mapping approach with something layered on of where the output, the endpoint needs to be a technical artifact, which is usually kind of amounts to just one more translation layer.
Okay, so in grasping this, you stated that process mapping is more of an organizational challenge than necessarily a technical one. How do
Yeah.
you help your clients navigate this organizational shift? And what are the initial steps you recommend for being able to make the implicit knowledge explicit?
Yeah, this so there is it's a bit of a question of where any organization happens to be at. It's to decide to map a process. The reality is you're probably not going to do all of you're not going to do all of your workflows, all your processes at once. Because I mean, in a given business, how many, depending on how you slice it, how many different workflows could there be? There could be, dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands if a company is large enough. And so you have to make decisions around where you're going to focus your effort first. I tend to recommend sort of making a priority ranked list, or at least a value ranked list of the workflows in terms of, say, if you could have this be fully automated in the way you sort of envision in a pie in the sky fashion, where would you rank those in terms of desirability? And then, with those, you would probably kind of co-assign a rating of sort of the workflow complexity, which can be a function of how many different systems does this interact with, how many different individuals or stakeholders are involved, so it might look a little different in each case, but essentially you are wanting to put some sort of arbitrary rating around the complexity. And I think where a good place to therefore start is if you've never attempted any automation or hadn't had any success doing so, I personally think starting with the lowest complexity, highest value item in that sort of list is a good place to start. Um, because your odds of success are high. The amount of implicit knowledge that you have to actually go and map out is going to be about as low as you'll find. And then there's going to be the opportunity to establish some foundational learnings along the way. How to build, what to build, how to build it. Do we need contractors? What skills do we need to build internally or hire out? All those sorts of things. You have an opportunity to work through those without having to contend with a lot of extra complexity.
Yeah, that's a great answer. You've been mentioned you've been struggling to find where AI really enhances some of the reporting, but find great value in generating contextual information like the meeting transcription and summaries. Can you expand on why contextual information is currently more valuable than basic reporting for AI agents and what limitations you have observed?
Sure. In terms of the contextual reporting, can what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, basically, you're generating contextual information.
Yeah.
An example: meeting transcriptions and summaries. Why is this contextual information more valuable than the basic reporting of AI agents?
I see what you mean. Yeah, because the reason this is so valuable, I think, is when some of these like contextual sort of reports and are being generated, typically where I have seen them is that it's pulling in data across, usually from across a number of systems that the staff typically have to concern themselves with. And each of these systems has its own overhead to have to go through and sort of discover information that is relevant and bring it back and format it into some sort of final report. It's all very laborious. And there's one of the more, I would say, common asks for AI applications right now are these single panes of glass, where it essentially brings in all these systems and makes them interactable in the most workflow relevant ways, and kind of pulls all that in and is able to format, be able to uh, sort of be able to bring in a layer of verification that what it brought in is correct and here's where it came from and what it says. Just being able to like essentially do all that in one place, because that is something where the amount of time that they don't have to spend context switching or going into different systems or verifying back into those systems is real ROI. So I think that's where some of the value really comes from in that, contextual information generation. It's just that it's such a laborious thing to put together under normal circumstances, and I think it's kind of some low-hanging fruit for AI implementations.
Okay. Now, for businesses looking to implement, excuse me, AI, what are some of the practical do's and don'ts to ensure productivity gains without sacrificing quality?
It's a great question, and there's probably a number of different ways to slice this. I think the thing that I would probably advise the most, I would talk about this maybe at the organizational level, is that from what I've seen, I think that top-down planning and approaches to AI is going to be ultimately where the highest ROI comes from, and the real winners are going to be emerging from. The contrast is against sort of like the bottom up approach, which I think is what we've seen mostly. It was kind of the early hope of the AI era, kind of 2025, maybe to a lesser extent into 2026. But essentially, companies would purchase all their staff a Microsoft Copilot seat and say, turn it loose on your workflows and see what you can do. And we'll maybe have a monthly sort of lunch and learn where people can present their tips and tricks for doing this. And it seems to be that while some of those things have helped a bit, it doesn't seem to justify the cost. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of headlines around. It's like AI is not delivering on the promise. It's like true, I think, but the commonality I tend to see there is the bottom up nature. Top down is where you have the opportunity to think through at an organizational level, in a very greenfield fashion. What are the areas we want to automate the most? Where is the highest value going to be? Where can we start? How can we develop a plan that permeates down, and it arrives with your staff with the benefit of having a coherent framework and approach and something that they can understand. It also affords the opportunity to not just augment workflows, but to potentially, redesign the entire workflow itself, or roll it up into something that's fundamentally new and more streamlined. Almost none of that is going to take place in a bottom-up way. A second thing that I think would be an important thing to approach is that if you are an organization, you are attempting some of these top-down approaches, is to establish clean ownership. Either depending on your scale, it could be sort of one dedicated staff who is, sort of, technically qualified, whatever that might mean in your organization. It could be a team that sort of has a lot of ownership over the planning and implementation of these initiatives. But essentially, the theme is not allowing this kind of diffusion to happen where nobody quite owns it or has the impetus or the incentive to try to drive it past where the point where it already is. In terms of applications of AI, it's a little bit harder to say because I feel like every 6 months or so, my what I thought is possible versus not possible is slightly invalidated. I will say one that does seem to be that seems to be holding up is the being very, very careful about using AI for strategy work. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use AI in the course of your strategic thinking, but I think trying to make it effectively a prediction engine that you are going to use to essentially act as an oracle into the future. It's possible that could change, but I haven't seen that at this moment in time, from what I've seen in say like data around prediction markets, the its ability to look into the future is not surpassing that of sophisticated humans. And I think this is even more the case for noisy, um, qualitative data environments like the real world happens to be. It's better at nice, data-rich, quantitative fields like finance. But all this is to say that if you are trying to build like an oracle for your CFO or CEO to leverage to make strategic decisions, that might not be the wisest use. But outside of that, I think there is quite a lot of opportunity, but it all depends on building a proper system, a well-governed architecture around the AI, and you can do quite a lot of pretty amazing things today.
Okay. Now, you highlighted risk management and human verification as critical aspects of AI implementation. What are the most significant risks businesses face when adopting AI? And what strategies do you recommend for effective human oversight and verification?
Right. So it depends on the field. It could be anything from if you're in finance, I think for example, if you're automating loan approvals, there's some case studies about this where the the loan approval sort of the AI layer, I think it under approved loans, but the case was is that it's every denial has to be defensible and auditable, and if I think in this case it turned out that the rather than being too rather than being too generous with loan issuances. It was too stingy, and that was the kind of thing where it's like, well, it this is beneath the investor expectation, and the investors had ended up becoming upset in the outcome of the product, and this so being unable to sort of like audit this and tweak it and adjust can sort of create issues. It's not a deterministic system, but you're trying to use it in deterministic ways. So there's risk in the auditability, but there's also risk in not being able to really set the dials in a way that is that you have perfect control over. I think in areas that are less financial in nature, in say like the client management sort of workflows we discussed before, the risk is reputational. The risk is quality. If you being able to write compellingly in the voice of your staff is an engineering challenge. I do not have a perfect review of sort of the tools that are available today in terms of how effective certain tooling is in producing accurate writing in a given user's voice. I suspect things are probably pretty good, but not perfect. And so there's risk there just in the voice, but there's also risk in say getting details wrong. And if details come across to clients that are either wrong or the communication cadence is feels unnatural or they receive a message that's unexpected, these are all things that kind of like tip the client off to that they're being managed by an agent. And I think we are going to be increasingly okay with that sort of engagement, but as it stands, there's still my sense is that people still feel that if they can tell they're being managed by an agent, especially if they happen to be paying a lot of money for something, that it at least inspires a little bit of worry, we'll say. In terms of how to avoid these outcomes, verification is definitely it is at the core of these. It looks different in each case. In the case of being able to audit a financial system, you there's a essentially you need to be able to tag data and decisions and the decision criteria at every node in the decision chain for whatever particular action, whether it's a recommendation or it's a loan approval or it's a fraud activity alert. It needs to like flow through the system to the surface where the human in the loop is reviewing the cases that are flagged for it. And it needs to be able to quickly go in and see right side by side all the criteria and information at each step of the chain. Again, so they don't have to go hunting through external systems to make a determination about a single case. So the core idea really is collapsing that verification time down to what it would be if they had to go into 5 different systems. Similarly, in the client management case, the verification becomes a factor, and it manifests in the way where if you are generating some sort of client communication, especially if it's pulling in context from multiple different systems, from a CRM, from QuickBooks, what have you, that it is exactly where it got each piece of information from is each claim is tagged and the source is tagged alongside somewhere in that interface that they can easily inspect. So really, it's essentially it really is making the ability to see that what the AI has given you is in fact what the case is. And now, of course, there are ways to tune the system where that is almost always going to be the case. But it needs to be kind of perfect for a lot of these fields where 99.9% is a catastrophic, outcome.
So the end result is when you put it all together, human intelligence is critical for verification and validation.
It can be there. I think in most cases today, and I think for most cases for the foreseeable future, it will be the case. There's some pieces I'm working on right now that are kind of breaking this down in a bit more detail and kind of that's it's essentially around the stage of AI readiness that a company is at somewhat determines where to what degree the human can be involved. And at the very top end, which I think most customers in most data environments are not at today, is where you have machines interacting with machines, and there is sufficient ability to verify by the machines, but the level of the data, the sophistication and the development of the data contracts that have to exist between the machines for it to be able to do those kinds of things is not the case in most fields right now. And so it's more of a look to the future. I think for the next 3 to 5 years, I would say we'll likely see the human in the loop doing most of the verification. And I think it will remain to be the case for most industries thereafter because of we'll say that there's things that it becomes unclear sort of like what verification means. When you're verifying discrete quantities, that's one thing. But if you need to verify an agentic buying decision, say for like a customer has a shopping agent and they want to get a pair of shoes, that's the buying was automated. What does verifying the pair of shoes that they wish to buy is correct? It pertains to preference, it pertains to size and like fit of the shoe, which is like not that information doesn't currently live anywhere. We have ways to express those or like fit parameters, but it's not, all this is to say it's messy and it requires judgment. So the more judgment that is in there, humans will remain. And like I said, I think that's going to be the case for a while.
Now, one of the things is I know you do a lot of work internally with AI. Do you often look at certain AI agents that you can outsource to and give some examples if you have?
The Most of the things I do today, so yes, I use a lot of AI tooling. I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of bang for my buck out of sort of noticing use cases that crop up in my personal work, whether it be for business development or for coding, and then realizing that like, oh, this is going to be something I need to repeat, and then it's sort of scaffolding out an application around that either I have like it's runs locally and I have a local storage if it's something simple, or perhaps I do like a small cloud deployment of it. I think that there's going to be more off the shelf tools that are kind of get better and better. Most of my personal use does revolve around sort of things around voice transcription, which isn't quite handing off to an agent, but it is agent driven at its core. But the rest of it really is sort of like using building agentic workflows that are kind of encapsulated in a custom web application to serve a particular purpose. It could be generating media assets for so for things on like LinkedIn, or for for my personal website, and things of that nature, I guess, are kind of like some of the primary examples.
Okay. Now, looking ahead, what do you see the greatest potential for AI agents to evolve and offer even more significant value for businesses like yourself?
I was just talking to a friend yesterday, sort of about this, and we keep sort of finding ways to sort of streamline our development workflows. And I'd sort of mentioned using sort of like voice transcription is something I lean on a lot, but he was describing to me that he had found sort of a way to where he has like a sort of a voice microphone that he can carry around with him, but he's set his local system up to where he will have multiple Claude agents running. And when a workflow finishes, he'll get a notification that it's done, and it will read back to him sort of like the summary of what was completed in that work thread. And he can manage back in by using the voice command. And this is parallelizing agents. He is completely away from a screen, or has the option to be completely away from the screen, and he can interact with it using voice. He's described to sort of taking that a step further to wiring that into his phone. And this example is fairly specific, but I think what it points to is that the opportunities for businesses to start using agents to parallelize and streamline a lot of their work as sort of the automatable surfaces become more well understood is going to sort of explode. I think because once the way to automate is understood, uh, like parallelizing and streamlining further with, say, the automation of things like using like voice, or integrating with your phone applications. Those things are sort of obvious next steps, and but while obvious, enhance the productivity quite dramatically. And so I think there's going to be versions of this that pop up in many different ways in many different businesses. For code, it's pretty straightforward. Given that it's so much focus has already been put on it, and it's kind of like an ideal domain for artificial intelligence. And there's been so much said about it over the past few years that it's just a very clean domain and a clean example.
Now, in terms of your company, who are the ideal prospects that should be doing business with you?
Uh, I think that I see an incredible amount of value in finance firms that are looking to automate workflows that were previously deterministic. I think that if there are projects where they have a great deal of where they have a layer of automation, but because the automation is a sort of deterministic automation, that they are experiencing they have a huge backlog of human review. And those sorts of situations, they said, whether fraud detection or insider threat monitoring, in kind of cybersecurity applications, those are situations with lots of false positives and things where AI can dramatically cut it down. Um, but I would say, additionally, I would say finance, investment, accounting companies who are know that they want to do something with AI, but they're currently at that AI, they're establishing AI readiness, and perhaps they're not sure where to begin, because most of my conversations, frankly, these days are encountering that situation where it's like people need help to understand what the next 2 to 3 steps are, and kind of get them running. So these are kind of some ideal sort of situations and implementations I think that we're keen to help folks out with.
Okay. Uh, to come full circle, uh, what do you see as Nuvocode's long-term vision for helping companies integrate AI, and what role do you see the AI workflow design playing in that future?
Yeah, great question. I really want to get to a more productized future because while the early promise of AI was that it's like, oh, well, SaaS is dead. We can just bring everything in-house and we can maintain our own software. That is absolutely possible, and that is easier than it was before. But what doesn't go away is the overhead of sort of like maintenance and also the overhead of like everything we just talked about with respect to AI readiness and data hygiene, unification, process mapping, all those things. Those are big, big efforts that cost a great deal in terms of effort and resources, financial and otherwise. And what I would like to get to is to start by as we start to build enough of these and the space itself of the technology begins to evolve. I would like to start building more productized offerings that are can come in and really be more bolt on. The way that there are some of these systems out now, but I think right now it's fairly limited. And I think to build more of these ways where businesses can get the benefits of AI automation, but they are not subject to having to do these massive internal, efforts that are, while related to where they're trying to go as a company, they aren't core to their processes and their business operations as they exist today. And so I think I want to make these adoption processes a much lighter lift for companies to get the benefit of it, and including companies that are more mid-market, because the biggest players, they have the resources to invest in these things. They're doing it already. So I think sort of democratizing that a little bit would be a high priority.
So the end result would be basically for a company to take a look at these productized um, products
Mhm.
to improve their streamline and office automation and reduce the manual labor.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And hope they can do it in a way where the amount of preparation on their side is a fraction of what it would be to sort of build this thing internally. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the vision there and the goal I'd say for kind of I think the next 3 to 5 year time frame, I'd like to see that really kind of come to fruition in a meaningful way.
Okay, cool. So at this time, I'm going to give you the floor to give the elevator pitch of why I should do business with you.
Well, I think you're coming to us with a problem that is something that's like highly, highly tractable, based on the amount of sort of the software engineering experience that we have, but also the AI domain experience. This is something we've thought a lot about. A lot of the problems that folks are facing are difficult, but not unique, and we are going to be bringing just a lot of experience, a extremely high degree of focus and professionalism, I think, which is probably borne out by their clients' experience so far, and there's not a lot of people out there doing right now the things that we're discussing doing, and there's going to be a lot of folks sort of, I don't want to say they're selling snake oil in any way, they're not, but being able to really get you to the place, organizationally speaking, uh, where what you are building is going to deliver you real return on investment and make your business more profitable. That's the frame that we take and we're concerned with first and foremost.
Okay. Joe, I appreciate your time. I think this was an excellent broadcast as we get to tap into your industry experience and professionalism. I can't thank you enough for your time to be able to do this podcast, where I'm sure the viewership is going to definitely benefit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Appreciate it.